Welcome to this new video on the Reddit Storylane. Have you ever wondered how thin the line can be between an innocent joke and a deep wound that never heals? My story begins with a question like that, and as I tell you what happened, I hope you can find the answers you seek. My name is Sarah. I'm 30 years old, and until a few years ago, I thought I knew what it meant to love and be loved. Mike, my ex-boyfriend, had been my life partner since university. We were inseparable. From the moment we met, there was a connection that felt right, like two pieces of a puzzle finding their place. We spent every possible moment together, our conversations ranging from casual topics to our hopes, dreams, and everything in between. I was thrilled to start a future with him, planning our wedding and envisioning a life together. I could picture it all so clearly. Our house, our careers, maybe even children one day. We were ready for the world. But as they say, life has its own way of messing up our plans. Mike had a best friend, David, whom he had known since they were children. David was, how can I describe him? A character in every sense of the word. Always ready to joke, often crossing the line of good sense. He had a knack for making everyone laugh, but sometimes his humor went too far. I never really liked him. There was something about him that never sat right with me, but for the sake of Mike, I tried to tolerate him. Mike valued his friendship deeply, and I could tell that he saw David as a brother. But David wasn't just any friend. He had this presence, this ability to make everything about himself, even when it wasn't appropriate. He was the kind of person who thrived on attention, and he didn't care who he hurt to get it. At first, I thought it was harmless. A prank here and there, an offhand comment that made everyone laugh. But soon, I began to notice something darker. It wasn't just about the jokes anymore. It was about manipulation, control, and an almost deliberate attempt to destabilize me. Every joke, every prank, every teasing glance seemed calculated to make me feel small, unimportant, and insecure. It wasn't just me. Others felt it too, but I was the one who bore the brunt of his jokes. Mike, caught in the middle, didn't seem to notice. Or worse, he didn't care. Every time David crossed a line, Mike would laugh it off, brushing it aside as if it were just part of David's charm. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. After all, I loved Mike, and love means compromise, doesn't it? But I was growing resentful, feeling like I was losing myself in the process. I was putting up with behavior that was degrading and dismissive, all in the name of keeping the peace. But deep down, I knew I was slowly allowing David and Mike to chip away at the person I used to be. I was no longer the confident, independent woman I once was. I had become someone who was constantly second-guessing herself, constantly doubting her worth. The day of the wedding arrived. We had spent months planning everything. Every detail was perfect. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had imagined this moment for years, envisioning myself walking down the aisle to meet the man I loved, surrounded by our friends and family. But as soon as I stepped into the venue, I felt the weight of all the unresolved tension. David was there, of course. He was Mike's best man, despite my repeated objections. I didn't want him anywhere near the wedding, but Mike insisted. After all, David had been a part of Mike's life for so long, and it seemed impossible to imagine the day without him. The ceremony began. Everything was going according to plan until the moment arrived when the officiant asked, "Does anyone have any objections?" This was the moment I had dreamed of for so long, when I would marry Mike and begin our future together. But then, David stood up. With a wicked grin, David interrupted the ceremony, his voice loud and clear. He proclaimed that he could not allow Mike to marry a traitor. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Before I could process his words, he went on to say that he had hired someone to pretend to be my lover. The room erupted in murmurs and nervous laughter. I felt like I had been slapped across the face. My body went numb. I couldn't breathe. My world, which had seemed so secure just moments before, was crumbling around me. I ran from the altar, fleeing into the bathroom, locking myself in. The sound of my heart pounding in my ears drowned out everything else. Tears streamed down my face as I sank to the floor. How could this be happening? How could someone I had once considered a friend humiliate me like this in front of everyone? My wedding was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful, but instead, it had become a nightmare. Mike followed me, knocking frantically on the door. He begged me to let him in, to hear him out. When I opened the door, he explained that David had immediately confessed it was all just a joke, a prank. "It was just a laugh, Sarah," he said. "David didn't mean it. It's all in good fun." But how could I accept that? How could I simply forgive something so cruel? The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal. I couldn't shake them off as easily as Mike seemed to think I could. It wasn't just a joke to me. It was a wound, deep and raw. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't about a joke anymore. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And I had none. Mike had allowed David to destroy the most important day of my life. And worse, he hadn't stood up for me. He hadn't protected me. I had always thought that in a relationship, you were supposed to be a team. But that day, I felt completely alone. I called my parents. I couldn't face them, but I needed someone to help me make sense of this. In a haze of tears, I told them what had happened. The wedding was called off. I couldn't go back to that place, to those people. I needed to leave, to escape from the nightmare that had overtaken my life. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my sense of self. It wasn't easy. The shame, the embarrassment, it lingered like a shadow, but I refused to let it define me. I threw myself into my work, into my friendships, into anything that could distract me from the pain. But then, just when I thought I was starting to heal, another bombshell dropped. My best friend, Jane, confessed something that shattered me. Before the wedding, she had slept with David. And now she was pregnant. Jane was like a sister to me. I couldn't fathom what she had done, or why she hadn't told me sooner. I was blindsided, completely crushed. The betrayal stung in ways I couldn't describe. Here was the person I had trusted most in the world, the person who had promised to have my back no matter what, and she had slept with the one man I hated most. In the days that followed, I went through a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, hurt. I didn't know what to do, how to handle it. I needed space to think. I took a step back from Jane, and for a long time I couldn't bear to talk to her. But as time passed, I came to a realization. Jane was still my friend, and although she had hurt me, she had not done it out of malice. She was just as broken as I was, lost in her own pain. In the end, I forgave her. It wasn't easy, but I did it. And when Tommy was born, I chose to be his godmother. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt right. I couldn't hold on to the anger anymore. It was eating me alive. As the years went by, David seemed to change. He became a father, and that seemed to ground him in ways I hadn't anticipated. I still couldn't bring myself to forgive him fully, though. The memory of what he had done, the way he had so callously humiliated me, stayed with me. But I tried to let go. I tried to move on, to stop letting his actions define my happiness. Mike never really got over our breakup. He reached out to me on numerous occasions, hoping we could get back together. But for me, it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I had given Mike the best years of my life, and he had chosen David over me time and time again. He had failed me when I needed him most, and I couldn't go back to someone who hadn't protected me. But then, David tried again. When Tommy turned 7, he used the excuse of the party to try to bring me and Mike back together. He sent me messages, pleading with me to put aside my feelings for the sake of the child. He called me selfish, accusing me of being unable to move past the past. But I had heard enough. I wrote back telling him that it wasn't about selfishness. It was about respecting my boundaries and acknowledging the pain that had been caused. I told him that I would never forgive him for what he had done. And that was that. The chapter closed for good. It was time to move forward. I started traveling, something I had always dreamed of but had never been able to do. I explored new places, met new people, and began to discover parts of myself that had been buried for so long. I learned to be independent, to live for myself and not for anyone else's approval. I learned that true happiness comes from within, from knowing that you are enough, regardless of the people around you. During my travels, I met people who shared their stories with me. Each person taught me something new about life, about resilience, and about love. I learned to see the beauty in the world, even in the small things. I discovered that joy isn't something you can find outside yourself. It's something you cultivate within. And once I embraced that truth, everything changed. One evening in a small village in Greece, I sat under the stars with a group of artists. We talked about life, about art, and about the things that had shaped us. One of them, as